Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. This Wednesday morning, a bigger squeeze is coming in the cost of living crisis. That's the new warning this morning for tens of thousands of us. What's the government going to do about it? We'll ask the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove shortly, as his boss hints help is coming in the near future. And his colleague, the Chancellor, hints it isn't. Plus, the Queen's speech barely alluded to the Northern Ireland Protocol as the row on whether or not to scrap it rages. So what will happen with that? We'll get the views of Labour's Justice Secretary Steve Reid, plus the SNP Westminster leader Ian Blackford, and the leader of the Lib Dems, that's Sir Ed Davey. It's Wednesday, the 11th of May. No emergency budget. Treasury slapped down after the Prime Minister hints that help for the cost of living crisis could be announced in days.
New figures reveal that 1.5 million British households could be heading for big bills. I'm here at a car boot sale to find out how they're coping.
Shining a light in the darkness, the photos that tell the story of the Ukrainian soldiers suffering beneath the besieged steelworks in Mariupol.
Boris Johnson travels to Sweden and Finland today ahead of a crucial decision by both countries on joining NATO, a move that would further provoke Russia.
Flat out stupid. Elon Musk, the billionaire set to buy Twitter, promises to let Trump back on the platform, criticising the fact that he was banned in the first place.
Banning Trump from Twitter didn't end Trump's voice. It will amplify it among the right. And this is why it is morally wrong and flat out stupid.
Sticking the boot in, Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy face off in the Wagatha Christie trial. We'll bring you the latest evidence live from court.
Not sustainable. A warning about China's COVID zero strategy from the man at the top of the World Health Organization.
The multi-million-pound jackpot winner of the Euro Millions revealed to be a ticket bought in the UK. Not me, is it? Otherwise I wouldn't be sat here. Also this morning for you, wherever you're watching us, from Australia to Africa. Thrown into the limelight as Prince Charles fills in for the Queen at the state opening of Parliament. We'll ask the historian Sir Anthony Selden for his views on the future of the monarchy. Plus, wouldn't bet against them, would you? Singing for Ukraine, the act thought to be in the grand final of the Eurovision Song Contest. We'll be speaking to the politics of the contest. That's at 9:45. Good morning. We start with a warning that things could be about to get tougher for tens of thousands of us. The Prime Minister hinted yesterday that more help could be on the way in the near future for those struggling to make ends meet. But soon after, the Treasury slapped down that announcement, telling Sky News there will be no emergency budget. The Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove will be on the programme in just a moment. First, though, it comes as multiple reports this morning warn of the pressures facing UK households. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research says Britain is on course to enter the recession this year, with the think tank estimating 1.5 million households will soon struggle with food and energy bills. Meanwhile, a survey by the consultancy Britain Thinks found the cost of living was now the dominant concern for UK households. 90% worried about the effects of rising prices. And a separate study by Shawbrook Bank showed that almost 1 in 5 were already losing sleep over the issue.
We are staring down the barrel of something we haven't seen in decades, a stagflation crisis. It is a truly shocking legacy of this government. It should humble those on the benches opposite. A government of the moment would use the great powers that it has to tackle this head-on. Bring forward an emergency budget.
We will continue to use all our ingenuity and compassion for as long as it takes. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, and I will be saying more about this in the days to come.
The cost of living crisis is making life difficult for many across the country. We have rising inflation, the the need to restore public finances. And as we level up across the country, we should ensure that we're a government that doesn't just work for certain parts of the country, but a government that truly works for everyone.
This should have been a cost of living Queen's speech. Now, there was a hint in the Prime Minister's speech, I don't know if you caught it. He said that there was going to be some measures brought forward by himself and the Chancellor in the next few days. Yet the Treasury are saying they have no idea what the Prime Minister is referring to.
Well, the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove, forgive me, it's too early in the morning. Michael Gove, of course, is with us here in the studio. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Queen's speech. Boris Johnson says he can't shield everyone from the cost of living crisis, is what he said. So where does he put that shield?
Well, we try to protect those who are most vulnerable. We've already taken steps, for example, by reducing council tax for people who are in particular council tax bands, who tend to be at the lower end of the income spectrum. But we also keep under review a range of things that we can do, both short-term and long-term, to help people. So, for example, in the Queen's speech yesterday, there are steps that we're taking to protect people who are renting, both those in the private rented sector and those who are also in social homes, in order to ensure that we can have security for them as well.
Dominic is on the programme later on. He's a single dad, he's on universal credit, and he says he's struggling to feed his family and top up the prepay gas meter. Will he fall within the shield?
Well, we'll do everything that we can. There are individual cases that I know of as a Member of Parliament, trying to represent my constituents effectively, with individuals who are in similar circumstances to Dominic, who face very difficult choices. And that's why in government last night, the Prime Minister convened a meeting of most of the Cabinet, everyone who has a responsibility that bears on cost of living, to make sure that we were all doing everything that we could to review every policy lever at our disposal in order to ensure that we can help people like Dominic and others. So the Queen's speech yesterday had a package of measures, many of which will help, but it's also the case that we don't just rest there. We are always in every way looking to see what we can do to help citizens.
Well, let's talk energy bills as a specific, because that's what Dominic is talking about later on. I just saw an interview with you back from 2016 before Brexit, and you said that after Brexit we would cut VAT on fuel bills.
Well, after Brexit we could cut VAT on fuel bills.
You said you would.
Well, at the time, I wasn't the Energy Secretary. At the time I said that, I remember the interview very well, that this was one of the things that we could do outside the European Union that we could not do inside the European Union. Well, what we've chosen to do is to target the help on the very poorest. Cutting VAT on fuel bills would mean that
would help everybody who pays a fuel bill,
including the Duke of Devonshire. I've nothing against the Duke, but my view is that if you've got a spare extra pound, it shouldn't go to dukes, it should go to people like Dominic.
So why did you highlight it as the case back in 2016 then?
Because it was one of the freedoms that Brexit could bring us, and there are other Brexit freedoms in the Queen's speech, which will enable us to both reduce the cost of living pressures, but also to grow the economy. Because ultimately, for Dominic, for you, for me, the answer to economic pressures now and in the future is a growing economy. So outside the European Union, for example, we can take steps to make sure that our farming and our agriculture and our scientific sector can produce more and can produce more cheaply.
But why?
Those bills are in the Queen's speech.
Sure, but why say, as a result of leaving the European Union, we could cut VAT on fuel if you didn't think it was a good idea?
I thought it was a good idea, is a good idea, but not the priority when you have a cost of living challenge of the one that we do at the moment. The most important thing to do is to target help on those people who are, in relative terms, poorer. And so, I want to cut all taxes all the time, everywhere. But at the moment, we have
on that, are we?
Well, we have to prioritise. I should say that in the last spring statement, again, Rishi showed that when it came to allocating money, his priority would always be to help the poorest. The changes to universal credit that he has introduced with Therese Coffey, the Work and Pension Secretary, have been designed to help the poorest. And VAT on fuel, as I say, all tax cuts, great, but tax cuts that help dukes as much as they help others, Not necessarily the best at this time.
OK, so given that you mentioned the Treasury, we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday saying he will say more in the days to come on how to help people with the cost of living. And then almost immediately, the Treasury is saying there'll be no emergency budget and we'll set out the budget timetable in the usual way. So who's right? Is there going to be an emergency budget or not?
They're both right. And no, there won't be an emergency budget.
OK, explain that to me.
I will. The key thing is, it's sometimes the case, it would never happen with Sky, it's sometimes the case that words from a Prime Minister or a Minister are overinterpreted. So the Prime Minister is right. We will be saying more and doing more in order to help people with the cost of living challenge that we face at the moment. But that doesn't amount to an emergency budget. It is part of the work of government. So last night, the Prime Minister convened a group of ministers. We'd all done work on some of the things that we could do to help those policy initiatives.
Energy, yeah.
Those policy initiatives will be announced by individual departments in due course as they're worked up. But that is part of the process for a government that is always and everywhere thinking about how we can help and how we can provide support, both short-term and long-term. The Queen's speech yesterday, it contains legislation. Those laws will take a little bit of time to pass. But once they're passed, then they give government the big levers necessary to generate economic growth. In the meantime, we look to see what we can do more quickly to help. But none of that amounts to an emergency budget.
So one of the suggestions...
And so therefore, both the Prime Minister and the Treasury were right. One or two people who were inclined to overinterpret have now had the chance to correct the record.
Or maybe the Prime Minister misspoke. Not that he ever does that.
He never does that.
Never does that. Levelling up, as your brief, of course, you talked about tackling the astronomical profits of property developers.
Yeah.
What about the astronomical profits of oil companies?
Well, we look at all economic activity and we make a judgment about what we can do in order to help the consumer and to help the citizen.
So are you looking at the astronomical profits of oil companies?
I'm looking...
a windfall tax?
No, I'm looking specifically at the property sector and making sure that companies, to be fair, which have done well out of government funding in the past, play their part in making sure, first of all, that they help us to resolve the building safety issue, the cladding issue that the Grenfell fire so tragically brought to light, and also that we work with them in order to make sure that more people have access to high-quality, beautiful, affordable homes. So, my job in my particular role at the moment is to work with those building companies and also to work with local authorities to get the right homes in the right places at the right price.
So you've got your eye on their astronomical profits, but not on the astronomical profits of energy companies?
Well, as I say, the position with energy was outlined in the energy strategy that the Prime Minister put forward just a few weeks ago, in which we outlined a path towards energy security for the long term, and making sure that we can have access to a dependable supply of lots of different types of energy. That is the right thing to do. And as has been pointed out, if you have the
What's
wrong...
that got to do with the astronomical profits of the oil industry?
Well, if you have the wrong sort of tax applied at the wrong time and in the wrong way, you can actually lead to companies not investing for the long term.
That's not what BP said. They said, nonsense, we'll continue on with our investment whether there's a windfall tax or not.
Well, you'll find many other people, not just in the oil and gas sector, but many other people who are observing the picture when it comes to energy overall, who would make the point very eloquently that if you have a tax that is introduced, as I say, at the wrong time and in the wrong way, that will deter the investment we need in order to ensure that we have oil and gas in the North Sea for the long term. So I was in Aberdeen, my hometown, recently. One of the things that people said to me there is, if we're going to have a transition towards net zero, oil and gas has to be part of that. We need investment. We won't get that investment if we have the wrong sort of tax applied now.
OK, I'd love to press you on that more, but we've not got time because I want to talk to you about the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Of course.
What's the plan?
Well, we want to make sure that we have a situation in Northern Ireland where people can have access to the goods from the rest of the United Kingdom that they have every right to enjoy.
How are you going to do it?
Well, negotiation. We're going to make sure that we...
So you're not just going to rip up the deal?
No, we're going to talk to the EU, but nothing is off the table. One of the things that the Brexit process...
So you might rip up the deal?
Well, nothing is off the table. Three things from the Brexit negotiation. One, Boris, in the past, has proved himself to be an expert negotiator and has secured what he's needed when he's needed it. Secondly, part of that is being prepared to say, look, if I don't get what I want in this negotiation, I am prepared to walk away and to use alternative methods. And three...
He did a deal.
And three...
Deal.
Yeah, he did do a deal in the end. And then three, always make sure that you have some cards you keep close to your chest so that you don't reveal your hand entirely to the other side.
OK, this is what Schultz says. He says, we have found a good way for Northern Ireland and no one should unilaterally, i.e. the UK, override the arrangement which we have agreed together.
Yes, but one of the whole points about the protocol, and I know because I was involved in making sure that the protocol would work, is that there's a committee that's been set up to monitor how it operates. The whole reason we have that committee is that the protocol, as it was agreed, contained lots of areas that required further work. That's why we've got negotiations. If that further work in negotiations can't yield the results that we need, then nothing is off the table. OK.
The Irish Taoiseach says he's worried about the peace process, should you rip up the deal. And the deputy leader has also been talking about that. And he says, we can't have any unilateral action from the UK. This is an international agreement. They have to honour their obligations.
Well, we do have obligations, and we have them under the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And what we want to do is to make sure that in Northern Ireland, the executive, the government of Northern Ireland comes together. That means you need to get people from both Sinn Féin and the DUP together. At the moment, the situation with the protocol is a barrier to getting the executive back together, a barrier to fulfilling the agreement.
It's not the European Union's fault that the UK signed a bad deal, as far as you're concerned. It's going to lead to trade wars, which means a further increase in the cost of living.
No.
Well, that's what the EU is saying.
Well, as we've seen before in negotiations, there are some actors on one side of the negotiation, one side of the discussion, who will say certain things, and that's fine. I'm not going to criticise them, but I think the important thing is to recognise that in Boris and in Liz Truss, we have two tough negotiators. Boris and Liz together secured not just our deal on exit from the EU, but a number of free trade agreements that people said that we couldn't sign in that time. So full respect to Olaf Scholz and Leo Varadkar, but Boris and Liz, they are the negotiating duo.
Here we go. Here's one of your own then. Simon Hoare, Conservative Chair of the Northern Ireland Select Committee. He says no honourable country should act unilaterally within an agreement.
Well, Simon, I understand, knows a great deal about the protocol because he's the chairman of the Northern Ireland Select Committee, as you say, and he will know, as I've said, that what we are seeking to do is to negotiate. And Liz, the Foreign Secretary, is seeing Maroš Šefčovič, the EU Vice President, tomorrow.
I hope you're keeping up at home with all these names.
Yes, tomorrow, that's diplomacy, in order to make sure that we can take steps to resolve this issue. Okay. So we are talking. That is what... that's what Foreign Secretary does.
When will we see whether you're either going to rip up this agreement or not? Next week? This week? Month's time?
There isn't
2023?
There isn't anything that's going to be ripped up. What we are doing is making sure that we safeguard the position of people who are in Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. It is our responsibility as the government of the whole United Kingdom to make sure that people there have are fully citizens of this country and that the peace process is protected. In order to protect the peace process, we need to make sure that we get that executive back up and running.
Just before I let you go, how comfortable do you feel, honestly, about the most law-breaking street in London being where the Prime Minister lives?
I'm not sure what you mean.
50 fixed penalty notices so far, more to come, probably for the Prime Minister as well. Does that sit happily with you?
This is a big issue. It relates, of course, to what went on in Downing Street and indeed more broadly.
And what's the answer to my question?
It has to be said. Well, I think that I've been asked about this many times, and what I hope always said is for anyone who, as so many people did, suffered during the pandemic, it will be difficult to contemplate that laws and rules were broken.
Yeah, but what's the answer to my question, Mr. Gove?
I'm explaining exactly how I feel.
Go on.
Because the question was a short and pithy one, but it requires unpacking because there is so much behind it. But ultimately, I think that you have to judge these things in the round. And my view is that the Prime Minister and the people who worked in Number 10 Downing Street contributed to getting the big questions right in the pandemic. And as recent figures show, the United Kingdom, even though the government was roundly criticised, the United Kingdom, and it's not a race, but the United Kingdom did a better job collectively of handling the COVID pandemic than many other countries, and that is down to the Prime Minister's leadership.
We're out of time. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking at the newspapers for you this morning, The Guardian's front page also looks at the Queen's speech and repeats the Labour critique. The headline, Tories bereft of ideas to tackle cost of living crisis. Just heard there from the Levelling Up Secretary, who implicitly disagrees. The Daily Mail says a new law to make working from home easier was axed from the speech. The Times has details on proposals to allow councils to tax the profits of developers. The Daily Telegraph reports that Liz Truss is standing firm in the face of an EU trade war threat. And just a reminder while we've got you, actually, that we'll be taking the show on the road for a special series of programmes next week, going back to my roots and finding out what the good people of Wigan feel about the cost of living crisis. Do let me know if you'd like to get involved by sending me a tweet. You can use the hashtag #Burley. And that's going to be here on Sky News at the usual time from the 16th of May. Still to come on the programme for you this morning. Later this hour, joined in the studio by Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey, getting his reaction to yesterday's Queen's speech. Is the government doing enough on the rising cost of living? Shadow Secretary of State for Justice Steve Reid will be with us just after 8, actually. And the leader of the SNP in Westminster, Ian Blackford, will be with me later in the programme. Lots to get into with him following the Queen's speech. As experts warn, inflation could go higher than 10% in the coming months. It's becoming ever more important to seek out a bargain. Shaman is standing by for us at a car boot sale in South London. Hi, good morning. Tell us more about where you are.
Hi, good morning. Yes, well, I'm at a car boot sale in Carshalton, and as you say, as the cost of living soars, we could all do with some extra cash in our pockets, and a car boot sale is a great way of doing this. Many people come down here, in fact, hundreds of people have been down here this morning trying to find a good deal. As well as that, it's a great way of having a good old clear out and getting some extra cash for those unwanted bits, and that's really necessary. We know now that every penny really does count, and there's been 3 separate reports out this morning backing up those concerns. For example, a survey by Britain Think says that the cost of living is now a dominant concern for many households, and that 90% of people are worried about rising prices. Another, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, said that 1.5 million people, that's 1 in 20 people, face bills for food and energy which they fear will soon exceed their disposable income. And as well as that, Snowbrook Bank said that 18% of people are losing sleep on this issue, and a quarter say that managing their finances are their main concern of stress. Now, I've been down here at this car boot sale speaking to people about whether or not it's trickled down to them. I have spoken to a chap called Frank. He buys and sells clothes down here at the Carshalton car boot sale, and he says that it's really had a huge impact on the types of goods that people are buying. They're opting for children's clothes and for school clothes and so on, rather than those nice dresses that they may have worn for a night out. So it's definitely impacting the sales here at Carshalton.
OK, lovely. Thank you. Prime Minister is travelling to Finland and Sweden today as the 2 Scandinavian countries debate whether to join NATO, with a decision expected this week. Boris Johnson will meet the leaders of both nations to discuss security in Europe and also the war in the Ukraine. As Russian troops continue their pounding of the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol, a photojournalist has revealed the grim extent of the suffering inside. In a series of stark pictures, a photographer with the press office of the Azov Special Forces Regiment of the Ukrainian National Guard has unveiled the horror of the dimly lit makeshift hospitals inside the plant. The men are seen with missing limbs, bandaged with makeshift linens and bloodied clothes. Others are having deep cuts dressed behind temporary plastic sheeting, providing barely any privacy.
We're taking heavy casualties. We're taking losses. Every day might be our last. We have extremely limited resources that are very short as for now. And the result of this might be our imminent death or capturing by the enemy, which is also means death for us.
Well, Deborah is standing by for us in Kiev this morning. Hello to you, Deborah. Good morning to you. When we see images like those we've just been sharing with our viewers, it really brings home the suffering in Ukraine, doesn't it?
It does. In that situation, the standoff at the steelworks has been one of the most sort of iconic, symbolic moments or images of Ukraine's resistance to Russia's invasion. These fighters in that plant have been holding out since the beginning of the war. Like Mariupol, which is the wider city, was one of the key first targets of Russian forces. And while Russia says they are in control of the city, they can't claim to be in control of the whole of the city because of those men holding out in that plant, and women too, fighters, despite enduring horrendous conditions, limited access to food, water, ammunition to be able to keep on fighting. And it's exactly this kind of struggle that Ukraine is enduring. That's why other countries that have until now had a neutral stance when it comes to things like NATO membership are now thinking of joining. I'm talking primarily, of course, about Sweden and Finland, which is where the Prime Minister is heading today. Both countries have said that they are thinking about potentially putting in an application to join NATO in the coming days. And it really underlines how Russia's war in Ukraine has backfired spectacularly. He wanted to have less NATO at his borders, supposedly. And instead, if these two countries do decide that they are going to join, then he will have a lot more.
Thank you. Amid all the suffering, something that those in Ukraine may be able to celebrate is their success at this year's Eurovision Song Contest. I wouldn't bet against them. Kalisz Orchestra has been voted through to the grand final of the Eurovision Song Contest, solidifying their position as favourites in the competition. Ukraine's folk rap track Stefania has been described by the group as a tribute to the singer's mother, but have since dedicated to all the country's matriarchs in the wake of the Russian invasion. Do you recognise those two guys? I bet you did. It's Elon Musk saying that if he succeeds in buying Twitter, he will reinstate Donald Trump's account. In an interview with the Financial Times, the world's richest person said that permanent bans should be extremely rare. The White House press secretary responded, saying social media platforms must not become forums for disinformation.
Banning Trump from Twitter didn't end Trump's voice. It will amplify it among the right. And this is why it is morally wrong and flat out stupid.
It's the decision by a private sector company to make on who will or will not be allowed on their platforms. What I will say, broadly speaking, is that our effort is to, of course, make sure that freedom of speech is protected across the country, but that also these platforms are not used for forums for disinformation. And we have seen a history of that, not just on Twitter, but also on Facebook.
Rebecca Vardy has told the High Court she did not leak stories about Colleen Rooney to the press as she gave evidence in the Wagatha Christie libel trial for the first time. She's suing Rooney after being publicly accused of leaking false stories to the media in 2019. And after several months of preliminary hearings, the libel trial got underway yesterday. We'll be live at the Royal Courts of Justice as the trial continues later on this morning. Before that, though, some of today's other headlines for you. And police have released new footage showing the arrest of the escaped Alabama inmate Casey White. He's surrendered to authorities, but his suspected accomplice, a female prison officer, Vicky White, was found with gunshot wounds and later died. The pair had stashed $29,000 in cash, 4 semi-automatic handguns and an assault rifle in the truck they took on the nearly 300 miles from the prison in Alabama to Indiana. At the time of the breakout, Mr. White was serving a 75-year prison term for attempted murder and other offences and was awaiting trial on charges of stabbing a woman to death. The games company Electronic Arts says it will stop making FIFA-branded games next year. It comes after FIFA claims FIFA was looking to double the fee it charges for licensing to $1 billion. The series will continue under a new name. Now, could this be your lucky day? Camelot says one lucky ticket holder in the UK has won the jackpot of £184 million. Don't forget the £262,899 and 10 pence. That makes whoever holds that ticket the UK's biggest ever national lottery winner. The legendary pop artist Andy Warhol's 1964 painting of Marilyn Monroe has sold for a record $195 million. The silkscreen portrait, named Shot Sage Blue Marilyn, is now the most expensive work ever sold at auction by an American artist. It's one in a series of paintings of the actress made by Warhol following her death in 1962. The head of the World Health Organization has voiced concerns over China's zero-COVID policy. It's a rare public comment by the UN agency on a government's handling of the pandemic.
We don't think that it's sustainable, considering the behavior of the virus now and what we anticipate in the future, and especially when we have now a good knowledge, understanding of the virus.
Tom's standing by for us in Beijing this morning. Hi, Tom. A very good morning to you. Tell us more.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, I mean, that word unsustainable, I want to show you what that actually looks like. This is an apartment block in Beijing that's had a couple of COVID cases, and it's been entirely sealed off. We'll take you a bit closer and have a look. Now, Beijing is basically under a lockdown right now. Schools are shut, gyms are shut, restaurants are shut, parks are shut, but they're not calling it a lockdown. They've had a handful of cases, 24, but these are the strict measures that are taking place. If you look here, they've been fencing up the whole thing, and the rest of us are free to walk around, but if you are caught with a COVID case, you're sent to a centralised quarantine. So Dr. Tedros has come up with this comment, saying it is unsustainable, looking at what's happening in Shanghai in particular, where they've had a very strict lockdown for 6 weeks now. You can see all these guards outside this place here, making sure no one gets out. They're taking deliveries as well. They have been working really, really hard on this pandemic. And the question is whether really you can keep doing that when we have vaccines. And we'll get out there. These are called the big whites because of their big white suits, the PPE, and there's lots of them all around Beijing. The question is, why is China sticking with this? And that reason is it hasn't vaccinated enough of its elderly population. Around 100 million people still haven't had a vaccine, and as a result, they're sticking with this COVID zero. The problem for many people is wondering whether they have a path to get vaccination. Because of that COVID zero policy, they're spending so much time, as you can see behind me, enforcing that policy. They're not vaccinating people enough. The rate of vaccination has been dropping. So that's left a lot of people looking at this saying, well, look, is this COVID zero as a means to an end, or is this an end in itself? This sort of control, is this a new normal for China?
OK, thanks a lot. Thank you. Fascinating stuff. Thank you. Let's tell you about the podcaster, Deborah James. She says she's mind blown by the outpouring of support she's received after raising more than £2 million for charity. And that was in a very, very short period of time. Having set up the funding appeal on Monday, Ms James told her Instagram followers that she was moving to hospice at home care to treat her terminal bowel cancer. After developing the illness in 2016, Ms James has dedicated her life to raising money for charitable causes. This is a live update of Deborah's Just Giving page. There you go. Or, in fact, more than £2.25 million. Some of the items in this morning's papers are guaranteed to raise some pulses. The Times, pictures a lady practising yoga for a book. I don't think we should have that advert on there, should we? So let's take that off, should we? Let's have a look at this one instead, should we? It's another picture for Extreme Lakeland. There you go, in the Telegraph. A wonderful feat of photography, a brave base jumper diving 600 feet into chilly waters in the Lake District. And don't look down. Walkers step out on the world's longest suspension bridge, stretching an astonishing 2,365 feet. Very impressive. Other news for you now. And have you had your morning coffee. I don't actually like coffee, but there we go. A new study has found drinking espressos could cause higher cholesterol levels in men, but not in women. Academics from Norway found that people who drank 3 to 5 espressos a day were more likely to have higher levels of cholesterol in the blood compared with those who did not drink espresso. And the level of cholesterol were higher in men than they were in women. So there. Now, amid the continuing unrest in Sri Lanka, speaking to a resident there about the situation on the ground. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove has told this programme there will not be an emergency budget. However, he said the government was exploring how it could help those struggling with the rising cost of living. Let's take a listen back to what he had to say. We heard from the Prime Minister yesterday saying he will say more in the days to come on how to help people with the cost of living. And then almost immediately, the Treasury is saying there'll be no emergency budget and we'll set out the budget timetable in the usual way. So who's right? Is there going to be an emergency budget or not?
They're both right. And no, there won't be an emergency budget.
OK, explain that to me.
I will. The key thing is, it's sometimes the case, it would never happen with Sky, it's sometimes the case that words from a Prime Minister or a Minister are overinterpreted. So the Prime Minister is right. We will be saying more and doing more in order to help people with the cost of living challenge that we face at the moment. But that doesn't amount to an emergency budget. It is part of the work of government.
Perky this morning, wasn't he?
He was, yes. And I think, the big question yesterday at the end of all of this was, is there enough on the cost of living? Because the government were talking a lot about growth in that Queen's speech. They were talking about growing the economy, but that is obviously, a more long-term thing. I think the question is, in the short term, what's going to be done? And I think you could tell that the Prime Minister was under pressure because in the House of Commons, he said that him and the Chancellor would go further in the coming days. So that was really interesting. But then we had the Chancellor later suggesting there's going to be no emergency budget. You asked Michael Gove rightly about that. He slightly sort of dodged the question. You heard him there saying they're both right. And no, there won't be an emergency budget. We will be saying and doing more. He said that journalists sometimes overinterpret things, but I don't think that was a particularly clear answer from Michael Gove.
No, we're going to be talking about Partygate as well. It was interesting what he had to say about that. I think we'll discuss it at 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
Look forward to it. Thanks very much indeed, Ellie. Thank you. Meantime, the Prime Minister is visiting Sweden and Finland today to discuss the war in Ukraine as the two Nordic countries debate whether to join NATO. Joining us now is the former Director of Policy Planning at NATO. That's Fabrice Pothy. Hello to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme this morning. What's your view? What do you think will happen with these two countries and NATO's reaction?
I think the train has already long left the station as to whether those two countries will be joining NATO. So it's just now a question of technicality, of getting the right legal and obviously security arrangements. But my bet from the start, from the 24th of February onwards, was that those two countries will be sitting at the NATO table with the other heads of state in Madrid at the end of June.
How do you think Vladimir Putin might interpret what's going on?
Well, we will all hope that he will interpret that as another proof that his strategy is actually backfiring, both in Ukraine but also in the broader Europe. He might indeed intend on putting pressure on those two countries. I mean, pressure has been on those two countries from Russia since 2014, 2015, since essentially they got closer to NATO. But there should not be the capacity to defend themselves, and the fact that the UK, the US, and other NATO countries are covering their back should not be underestimated. So I think we are now really entering a historic moment where we are closing one of the big remaining gaps in the Baltic region in terms of NATO membership.
I did speak to a member of the Duma earlier on in the week, and they were saying that if this did happen, then Finland particularly would then be allowed to have NATO weapons on its soil. And as a result, Russia would see that as a threat.
Well, I think Russia likes to see everything it wants to see as a threat to justify the kind of war of aggression they have unleashed on Ukraine. So I don't think this statement should be taken literally. As to whether NATO forces and weapons would be deployed on those countries' territory, I think this is their decision and the NATO decision. But for the moment, what you see is that Finland is very much capable of defending itself. It has one of the largest land forces in Europe. It's really going to boost NATO's defensive capabilities in the Baltic, but across the alliance. So I would not worry about deploying something on those territories yet.
But it's a big change for Finland itself, isn't it? Particularly the defence policy previously had been considered to be neutral, and militarily that would change now.
Neutral but not incapable. I think that's a very important distinction. I mean, this is one of the countries that has purchased F-35, the last generation fighter jets from the United States. So they are part of the F-35 club. Again, a very large reserve force. So neutrality doesn't mean the lack of capacity of defending itself. I think the real change is more in Sweden, where until now, there's this ideological kind of link with this notion of non-alignment, which is not entirely true because Sweden is part of the EU and has also taken a side in some crises. But I think Sweden is more struggling with its own ideological background here.
How long does this process take for them to join NATO? What's considered?
As long as the kind of membership documents, if you want, are ratified in each NATO parliament, including the US Congress. And this is why there's this kind of in-between moment between the declaration of membership and the full-fledged legal membership, where my understanding is some of the big NATO countries, the US, but also the UK, will be providing bilateral security guarantees so that there's no ambiguity that those countries are going to be vulnerable to some sort of Russian pressure.
OK, it's great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
In other news, protesters in Sri Lanka are calling for a new government after 8 people were killed in deadly clashes as the country faces its worst economic crisis since gaining independence. Sandan Fernando is in the capital of, which is Colombo, of course, for us this morning. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us. What is the latest situation there?
Hi, good morning. And after the Defence Minister given permission to Thai forces to open fire at anyone who is looting or anyone behaving unmanner, the situation is getting peaceful right now. So behind me, you can see this is a law leading to the president private residencies. So they are not allowing to enter anyone who doesn't have any sort of official identification or official reason. So I had a chance to speak with several people around this area, around the Colombo. So they said with the curfew situation, they are having very hard time because they are not getting enough essential supply. So today morning, the fuel drivers who is transporting fuel, they say they will withdraw from their transportation service. And because we don't have a fuel coming to the people right now. And political situation also getting very pressurable to resign the president. Today morning, the 2 opposition.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your insight. Much appreciated. Thank you. Well, joining us now is a resident in Colombo. That's Nuzli Hamim. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. What is life like for you at the moment in Colombo?
It was what we were doing was a peaceful protest, but the pro-government and the government people tried to attack us. So that's where everything went wrong, and people are suffering. People were suffering for the last 2 years or so. It's been because of the mismanagement of the government, especially because of the Rajapakshas. So people's demands are very clear. Just leave us and take accountability for what you have done. We've been going through like a lot of shit. Even to get a pump to your car, you need to be in the line for like 6 to 8 hours. There is no milk powder, no gas for cooking. All the like small businesses are getting closed.
Yeah, that'd be rubbish.
Yeah, really good.
Including no medicines for children, no medicine for the elderly. So it's like, I love this country. It's like this country is like, we are fighting for this country, but at the moment, because of these politicians' action, this country has turned into a hellhole, and we are suffering from it. Yes.
OK, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems, is with us in the studio. You were just saying that you follow the situation in Sri Lanka very closely.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who've refugees from Sri Lanka, particularly Tamil community, and I represent a lot of Tamil, British Tamils, and they have always been pretty angry by the government there, the Rajapaksa family, who've got the president and the prime minister, and frankly have run the whole economy in a very corrupt way. And have mismanaged the economy, and now it's affecting the lives of everybody in Sri Lanka. So I hope our government will be sending the strongest signals to tell the Rajapaksa government it's time for them to go. What
Intel did you get from the Queen's speech yesterday when it comes to our government's view on our own cost of living crisis?
Not a lot. I mean, I was hugely disappointed. I was expecting that after the people had said during the local election results they were not happy, the government would take some action. But there was nothing for the cost of living. And there are millions of families...
What do you want them to do? There's no money.
There is. We need a VAT tax cut. That's what Liberal Democrats have argued for, worth £600. And you can pay for that by asking the oil and gas companies to pay a windfall tax. They're making huge profits. And that's the flip side of this higher heating bills and the higher prices at the petrol pumps.
A government minister on the programme earlier in the week said they're paying enough tax for now.
Well, I disagree with him. I want a fair tax. I want a fairer society. I want to help people. And when these oil and gas companies are making profits they never expected to make, these are huge super profits. It's only fair to ask them to pay the money to help people who are having to pay those bills. It was really interesting. One of the chief executives of these companies said the other day that their investment plans would not be affected at all by a windfall tax, which is the government's previous argument they were using against it. And so the government have got nowhere to hide now. They should ask these oil and gas companies to pay more money, and then we have that money for the tax cut that millions of families and pensioners need.
How worried are you about the Northern Ireland Protocol being ripped up? We had Mr Gove on the programme just a few moments ago, and he said it was never set in stone. It was something that was always fluid and was meant to be negotiated along the way.
Well, I have to say I disagree with Mr Gove. It was an international treaty. International treaties aren't aren't fluid and flexible. They're clearly treaties. Well, what worries me about this is the government seemed to be prepared to contemplate a trade war with our European neighbours. A trade war at a time of a cost of living emergency would be an absolute disaster. People need to be aware that if the government go down that route, the inflation we've seen so far will get even worse. The supplies of things in the shops would get even worse. And the government needs to be helping people. People are really struggling. And for Michael Gove and Boris Johnson and the rest of them to think that a trade war is the right way to deal with the cost of living crisis and economic crisis, I don't know what planet they're living on.
Well, interestingly, I did put that to him, and he said that would just not happen. There's not going to be a trade war.
Well, I sincerely hope there isn't. But if they're thinking of ditching the protocol, which was the international treaty, let's remember that Boris Johnson signed, it was his idea, if they now turn their back on that, the danger is there would be a trade war. I mean, let's be realistic about this. And I really worry about that. I worry about that for the people of Northern Ireland, for the business in Northern Ireland, and I worry about it for people across the United Kingdom. People are already hurting enough. They're really suffering. They're worried about the increase in heating and energy bills that's going to come this autumn. They're worried about the higher taxes they're paying. For the Conservatives now to say, well, it's OK, well, there'll be a trade war, I'm sorry, that's just not acceptable.
You talk about energy costs. I also put it to Mr Gove that before Brexit, he did say that VAT would be cut on energy bills. That hasn't happened. He's now said that is because it would be a 5% cut for everybody, and dukes and princes don't need that cut.
Well, the problem with Mr Gove and the Conservatives is they keep breaking their promises. This is not the only promise they've broken. They promised not to raise taxes, and they've put up taxes. They promised not pensioners that they would keep the triple lock on pensions. They've broken that promise. This is a government that breaks promises left, right and centre, and it's hurting people out there.
But do you think a cut on the VAT on energy bills is the right way forward?
I think a broader cut in VAT is the right way forward. I wouldn't just limit it to energy bills. Food prices are going up, petrol prices are going up. The way to really help people in a very big and bold way is what Liberal Democrats are arguing for, which is a 2.5% cut in VAT down to 17.5%. That would give the average family £600 a year. So I think that's the sort of bold measure that's needed. You can only afford it. It's not going to be enough,
though, is it, for energy bills, the 600 quid?
Well, it would go some way. I mean, we have another set of policies linked to that, which would help the most vulnerable, because £600 would be for everybody, for the average family. But there are pensioners, disabled people, people on very low incomes who will need some extra help. So we've argued that what's called a warm home discount, which takes money directly off people's energy bills, that should be doubled, and the number of people who could get that should be increased. So that's real help to people who are struggling.
Where are you on Sir Keir Starmer and Beergate?
Well, at the weekend, I was suggesting that he would have to consider a position if he got a fixed penalty notice.
He would?
He would have to. Yeah. And then early this week, he actually said that's what position he would take, that if he got a fixed penalty notice from the Durham police, he would resign. And I was actually quite pleased to see him say that, because I think that shows integrity and a willingness to accept the consequences.
Yeah, but
I just wish that the Prime Minister showed some integrity.
Yeah, but in March he did say, I think it was in March, the Leader of the Opposition said because the Prime Minister was being investigated by the police, he should resign. And now he's being investigated by the police, but he's not resigning.
Well, listen, he's got to make his own decisions.
No, but I wonder what you think.
Right. Well, I've said that I think it's at least good that he's prepared to resign if he gets a fixed penalty notice. I just note the Prime Minister's had a fixed penalty notice. He's not resigned. I also note there's a possibility that the Prime Minister might get even more fixed penalty notices. So, the Prime Minister is in charge of our country. He's supposed to be helping people who are struggling. He's not doing that. And my worry is he's not giving leadership. He's now become a very weak leader because he's dogged by these crises and scandals.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but my question is, should the Leader of the Opposition, who is now part of a criminal investigation, resign, given that that's what he said the Prime Minister should do?
Well, I haven't said that. I've been really clear on my position throughout this. He's got to decide his own position. I actually called on the Prime Minister to resign, not when there was a police investigation. I called for him to resign before that, and I explained why. He had said he'd lied to Parliament about parties, and it turned out with Allegra Stratton's comments that there were parties. So my problem with the Prime Minister is not just that he broke the law, but he's dishonest.
OK, it's good to see you, Sir Ed. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you. What does Michael Gove think about the criminality at number 10 Downing Street? That to come in just a moment here on Sky. Stay tuned.